everybody, Jade Hamilton here again, and today I'm doing a mixture of tags. I'm doing a couple of specific Monday ones, but I'm also doing one that I missed over the weekend. So I'll start with that one. Well, the one that I missed is Fresh Face Friday, which is with our lovely friend Lynn at My Bella Blessing, because I'm going to introduce you to this little man. Now, this is Henry. Now, he is a vampire Build-A-Bear. His hair is supposed to lay down flat, but he's got such dreadful bedhead that he looks like something out the car. Oh my goodness. As you can see, he's got a very sort of lowery, low-browed expression and these very big, expressive green eyes. I got him on eBay a little while ago and I just fell completely in love with him. And as it's Monday, we're also doing Monster Monday with our lovely friend Alison at Equestrian Mama, and Gilly the Monster is also there. And we're doing Whatever I Want Monday with our lovely friend Dee at the Baby Patch. And for good measure, we're also doing New Doll Clothes, which is my friend Jay's tag at J Dolls UK. Because you're seeing this outfit on Henry for the first time. It does fit him better than it looks, I promise. But he's been trying to pull it off because he's in a mood, aren't you, mister? He decided he was in a strop and he wanted to be picked up and have cuddles and a story. So we'll have a story in a minute, won't we? But he's wearing this beautiful scarlet romper, which is originally from Jules, but I got it from one of my favourite stores on eBay for, I think it was £1.50. It's, I say, this beautiful scarlet romper with these lovely black and white striped vest underneath it. It looks a bit like something from Beetlejuice, doesn't it? Very Tim Burton sort of look. I say, Henry, I absolutely fell in love with him. I just think he is the cutest thing ever. As I say, he's got his big sort of lowery blue eyes and a little blue nose and a smiley mouth with two little teeth right at the front. He is an absolute cutie. He can also be a bit of a, what's it? But that's small boys for you, isn't it? Now we've got the tags done and, before I move on, if you haven't checked out Alison's channel, Lynn's channel, Jay's channel or Dee's channel yet, please, please, please do. They're wonderful ladies with wonderful, wonderful babies, and they've all got different things to bring to the table. So if you can, go over and give them some support, that would be lovely. Right, now, I apologise, it's a bit of a chaotic video today. On to the story, which is Granny the Pag by Nina Borden. As per all videos where I read, all copyright goes to the Nina Borden estate and to Puffin. I own absolutely nothing. Make yourself really comfortable. Grab a hot drink if you've got one. grab a blanket if you're chilly or a fan if you're hot. And we'll carry on where we left off. I think the last time we read, we were on, I think was it chapter 2, where Kat's grandmother, aka the Pag, had turned up on her motorbike, and Kat was creased up with embarrassment. So let's see how things are gonna go today. Chapter 3. I didn't know his surname, not until later. In the beginning he was just Willie, who sat at the back of the class, flicking pellets of paper at people and picking his nose and flicking the pickings. Rosie and I called him Willie Snotnose. Not all the names we made up for people were so obvious, nor so nasty, but Willie deserved it. He pinched, he sniggered, he sneered, he scrumpled up people's work if they left it on their desk for a minute. He stuck out his foot to trip the monitors up when they were carrying anything that might spill, like jugs of water at lunchtime. He never got into trouble because he made sure none of the teachers were looking or listening, and none of us told on him. We weren't frightened exactly. It just wasn't worth it. He could get his own back too easily. Willie had a thin face and a long, thin nose, but his mouth was fat and droopy, the bottom lip hanging open to show the inside of his lip, wet and dark as a plum. Although he was skinny and not very tall, he had big, strong hands like a man's. I'd seen him in the playground, sitting on top of a much bigger and older boy, who was lying face down and crying. Willie looked perfectly comfortable, grinning around at his gang as he held both the boy's wrists with one hand and picked his nose with the other. Ooh, I don't think Willie sounds like a nice boy. Do you, Henry? No, he sounds mean, doesn't he? What's that? You think he's mean because something bad's... Ah, I see. You think there's something not very nice that's going on with him, and that's why he's being so horrible to people. Do you know, I think you might be right. Let's read on and see, shall we? There were 3 or 4 boys in his gang, none of them from our class, all of them bigger and older than he was. They met up at break and at lunchtime and stalked round the playground like a pack of wolves looking for dinner. The sensible thing was not to look at them, or not to be caught looking anyway. Rosie said, "If you look at them, that means you're insulting them, so it's okay to beat you up. If you don't look, that means you're invisible, so they don't see you. They want to hurt someone, but they need an excuse. It's a sort of game that they play." Rosie doesn't talk all that much. Not as much as I do. Not as much as Tom. But when she does say something, you know she's worked it out properly. And she never seems to get into trouble. If she'd been with me when Willie picked on me that day, which was the day after the Pag had come to the school on the bike and embarrassed me, she would never have let me answer him back. she'd have made me stalk off with my nose in the air. But Rosie was in bed, at home, in bed with Flo, and I was playing with a girl called Fiona, who was my spare friend, like a spare tyre, for when Rosie was busy. We were playing hopscotch, not very seriously, because we were growing out of this babyish game, and suddenly Willie Snotnose was there, leaning against the wall, picking his nose and grinning. I refused to look at him. He sniggered slyly to attract my attention, and I just tossed my hair back and hopped more energetically. Then he said, "Who's that old witch you went off with last night?" I gave him a withering look. He said, "I was just asking a question. I mean, she's a bit old to be anyone's mother." I said nothing. Fiona said, "I've got to go somewhere," and ran off towards the girls' lavatories. Willie said, in a different tone of voice, "That's an excellent bike she's got. Whoever she is, I mean, it's a real biker's bike." "It's a Harley Davidson, I said. "She used to have a Vincent Black Shadow, but that's in a museum now." I had been taken in because he'd sound simply interested, not sarcastic or spiteful, but as soon as I'd spoken I knew it had been a mistake. I'd fallen into his trap. I'd made myself visible. He said, "Where's the coven cat? Do you dance round the fire with your clothes off? Can I come and watch sometime? I won't tell anyone." His fat, droopy mouth was wetter than ever. I said, "You're disgusting, Willie Wetmouth. Willie Snotnose. Do you know that's what everyone calls you?" His pale eyes sparked bright, as if a light had been turned on behind them. He came close, and I could see myself in them. I stepped back, but I was determined not to turn and run. I said, "You touch me, Willie Snotnose, I'll kill you." I knew I wouldn't have a chance, but I was so angry I didn't care. And in fact, all he did was catch hold of my wrist and twist the skin in a quick Chinese burn. I thumped him with my free hand and he let me go. He laughed in his sneery way and said, "That's just a free sample." The light of science appeared in the playground, clanging the bell for afternoon school. She was the English teacher and our form mistress, in fact. But Rosie had chosen that name for her out of the hymn that begins, "These things shall be a loftier race," because she was about 7 foot tall. I turned my back on Willie and set off as quickly as I could without running. He was just behind me, and when I had to slow down because we were all bunched up, trying to get through the door of the classroom, I could feel his breath on my neck. He said in my ear, "That's why you're called Cat, isn't it? You've got that black hair. Witches always have black cats. Will she come to fetch you from school on her broomstick?" I began to be really scared then. I had persuaded the Pag that I would be all right today, coming home on my own. Tom's a fusspot, Pag, honestly. It's him hates the dark on the common, not me. And some of the bigger girls go that way to the station. I can always tag on to them. But because the pag had been too busy to listen properly, she was going to London to give one of her lectures at the university. She believed me. We had two lessons that afternoon. English with the light of science and French with the tooth fairy. I didn't hear a word either of them said. I would make up my mind whether it would be better to get out of school just before Willie had collected his gang, or to hang about, hide until they'd given up on me and given me up and gone home. I thought if I had Rosie's grandmother's telephone number, I could ring her and ask her to come and meet me halfway on the common, though if I did that, Rosie's grandmother would tell Rosie's mother, and Rosie's mother would tell the pag, who would know I'd lied to her. And anyway, I didn't have Rosie's grandmother's telephone number. In the end, I decided on running. I was at the gate, coat buttoned up wrongly, shoes, laces flapping, within minutes of slamming my desk shut. I am quite a good runner, good swimmer too, though not so good at ball games. And I was over the common and through the wood at the speed that astonished me. I looked back and there was no one behind me. I wondered if I should go and see Rosie's grandmother, but I wasn't sure if she would want to see me without Rosie and Tom, and so I ran on to the station. I'd forgotten that there were fewer trains at this time of day before the evening rush when the shops and offices closed, and that one of the reasons we stopped to see Rosie's grandmother after school was because otherwise we had a long wait on a cold, empty platform. When I got to the station, there was no one about except the man in the ticket office. And once I'd gone through the barrier and across the bridge and down the stairs to the tracks, there was no one at all. It began to be foggy. The lights in the station were fuzzy and dim, and there seemed to be more shadows than usual. There was a waiting room with ladies painted in yellow paint on the door, but there was a light outside and no lock. There was no light outside and no lock. There was no place to hide, so I stood under the stairs and hoped the train would come soon. I counted under my breath. I thought, if I get to 1,000 and nothing happens, I'll get safely home. I got to 619 when I heard the train shaking the rails. At the same time, someone was coming down the wooden steps above my head. Slow, thumping treads like an old, heavy person, and a quicker pattering sound. I shrank against the greasy wall under the stairs. Even if Willie hadn't followed me over the common, he knew that Rosie and I took the train home. But it was only a blind man with his dog. The train drew up with a hissing of brakes. The doors opened. The blind man got into the last carriage, and I followed him. As far as I'd been able to tell, peering in as it rattled past, the rest of the train was empty. Better a blind man than no one, I thought. I cleared my throat and said, "Good girl," to the dog, so our master should know I was there. He moved his head in my direction, but that was all. He wore very dark glasses, and I had an uncomfortable feeling that in spite of the dog and the white stick, he was watching me. I waited for the train to move. I said to the blind man, "Do you think the train's stuck at the station?" Giving a bit of a laugh, making a joke of it. But he said nothing, just sat there, his blank, white, doughy face turned towards me. The train gave a little lurch. I said in the same bright, sociable way, "Well, it seems to have made up its mind to do something." And at that very moment they came, tearing down the steps to the platform, whooping and screaming, and flung themselves into the carriage. The doors closed behind them, and they collapsed on the seats, on the same side as the blind man, and opposite me. There were only three of them: Willie Snotnose, Fat Boy, and Fish Breath. Fish Breath was the oldest, 14 or 15. Rose and I had decided when we first marked him down as one of the gang. Fat Boy was in Tom's class, so at the time this happened, he'd have been 12, just a year older than me. I sat staring at them and thinking how ugly the three of them were. Fish Breath especially, with his bulgy eyes like golf balls and a mouth of what looked like black rotting spikes. I thought I might ask Rosie if she reckoned being so ugly had brought them together, and then asked myself if I would live to see Rosie again. I didn't really believe they'd hurt me. It was what the Pag calls gallows humour, which is making a joke to keep your spirits up when bad things are happening. And it did make me feel braver. After their noisy rush into the carriage, they'd gone quiet and were staring at me without any expression. All three of them. I thought, that's what they're going to do. Try to frighten me. Fish Breath said in a quiet, dangerous voice, "Willie don't like being called rude, nasty names." The blind man moved his head in Fish Breath's direction, but gave no other sign of having heard. Willie said, "Witch's cat, dirty old witch's cat, how do you like it?" I said, "There's no such thing as witches. You know that perfectly well. Witches are for children's stories, not for real life." But they started rolling around, and Fat Boy started rolling around in his seat, hooting with laughter. In between hoots, he said, "Tell her, Willie. Tell her what you're going to do to her." His fat face was shining. I tried to think what he looked like so that I could tell Rosie, but all I could think was that he looked hungry. The blind man stood up. The dog's harness jangled softly as she led him to the other end of the carriage. He sat down with his back to us. Fish Breath said softly, "See, he don't want to get caught up in anything." I felt sick. The blind man must know that something was wrong. Perhaps he couldn't do much to help me, but he was a grown man, and he turned his back on me. He got out at the next station. There were people waiting on the platform, but when the doors opened, there was no one close to our carriage, and Willie jumped on me the second I moved. Once the doors had closed, he wrapped my hair round his hand so tight that I thought he would tear it out by the roots. I said, "That man got off the train to fetch the police. They'll catch you at the next station." But I didn't believe it. Willie gave my hair a tug that seemed to tear my scalp off. I said, "If you hurt me, if you do anything to me, you'll be in really bad trouble. My granny isn't a witch, but she's a pag. Bet you don't know what that is." "Stupid brat." Fishburne said, "Shall I light her up, Willie?" He had a cigarette lighter in his hand. The yellow flame shot out several centimetres. He said, "If she's a witch, it won't burn her." I screamed then. Screamed and screamed, but the train was rattling and banging through the dark tunnel. I shut my eyes and threw myself about, and I thought I smelt the singeing smell, my hair burning. Willie said, "Shut up, you silly cow." I opened my eyes then and saw his pale eyes and wet mouth close to mine. He'd let go my hair and was holding my arms spread out either side of me, forced back, hurting my shoulders. He was kneeling on the back seat, pinning my legs down with his. I could see Fat Boy and Fish Breath behind him, leering at me over my shoulders. I thought, suppose one of them has a knife. I felt calm suddenly. I knew what to do, the only thing I could do. It might not save me, but there was only one more stop now, before my own station. There was no sign of Fat Boy. Hang on, right. About another 4 or 5 minutes. Sorry, I missed a page. It didn't occur to me until later that they might not let me get out, that they could keep me a prisoner. I said, "Don't you know about pags? They aren't witches, of course, but they are special people. I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's a secret. But if you let me go, then I'll tell you." I looked straight into Willie's pale eyes. I wasn't afraid. I told myself I wasn't afraid. And he was the one who blinked first. He didn't let go of my arms altogether, but he loosened his grip. I said, speaking very slowly, in the most secretive and thrilling voice I could manage. They are the people who have all the power in the world, not just prime ministers and presidents, but astronauts and spies and really great scientists. The sort of people who make all the really important things in the world happen. You don't always know who they are, even if they live next door to you. But that's the most secret thing. But they know. And if you hurt one of them, or hurt someone who belongs to their family, the others will get you. The train was out of the tunnel now, rushing through the next station without stopping, as it often did in the afternoons. and into the black tunnel again. Only about another 2.5 minutes. Unless the train stopped in the tunnel. That happened sometimes because the electric cables were about 100 years old and needed repairing. I thought Willie was looking puzzled, as if he didn't know what to do next. Fat Boy said, "Shut the stupid brat up." He said something much ruder than stupid brat, but I don't care to write it. Then, "Your dad's a pag, come to that, Willie." Willie had stopped, kneeling over me. There were pins and needles in my legs. My arms were free too, but I didn't dare stretch them or rub me in case Willie hadn't realised he'd let me go. The train was slowing down. My station was a busy one because it was next to a big shopping centre, and as soon as the doors opened, about 20 women and several hundred yellow plastic bags filled up the carriage. I had to push my way out. None of the gang tried to stop me, but halfway up the stairs to the footbridge, I looked over my shoulder and saw them at the bottom. Not Fish Breath, but Fat Boy, his face bobbing like a red balloon, and Willie. He was shouting something. People were running down the stairs in a hurry to catch the train, which was still at the platform. A man said, "Look where you're going, young lady." Then I heard dogs barking. The pag was waiting for me on the far side of the footbridge, with Sally and Amber and Wilkins the mongrel. She was wearing her black wool and the brooch. She put her hair up on top of her head, as she usually did when she was giving lectures. It made her seem taller than ever, proud-looking and fierce. Not weird at all, I thought suddenly. More like a queen or a duchess. She said, "I got back in time, so I thought I might as well give some of the old dogs a run." Then she looked at me properly. "What's the matter? What's wrong, Catkin?" She didn't often call me a pet name. It brought tears into my throat. I turned and pointed at Willie, who was on the footbridge behind me. There was no sign of Fat Boy. I said, "They chased me on the train. Him and the others. They teased me." It had been much worse than teasing, but it was the only word I could think of at that moment. And the dogs were jumping up, whimpering and trying to lick me. And I was safe. And now I was safe. I was afraid of making a fuss about nothing. Especially when Willie came up, holding my school bag. He said, "You left this behind, Cat." It was a different boy who smiled at the pag. Not the Willie who'd pinned me down in the carriage. This Willie's grey eyes danced merrily either side of his long nose, and the smile stopped his lower lip hanging loose and made his fat mouth look gentle. He said to the pag, "I thought she might need it for homework." I said, "They were going to burn me, to set fire to my hair." "It wasn't me," Willie said. "It was only a joke, but he shouldn't have done it." He was still holding my bag. I took it from him. The pag said, "Cat?" and I growled a thank you. "That's all right, no trouble," Willie said. He put out his hand to pat the nearest dog, Wilkins the mongrel, and snatched it back as Wilkins lifted his lip in a snarl. The pag looked from Willie to me and back to Willie again. She said, I don't know what has happened, and if Tat doesn't tell me, I won't try to guess. But I tell you one thing, young man. If you bully my granddaughter, I will not only inform the authorities, your parents and teachers, but I will myself personally throw you so hard into the middle of next week you will never come back. That you may never come back. Written down, this looks more of a joke than a threat, but by the way the Pag said it, with pure ice cold menace, as if it really meant something, sent shivers down my spine, and it drained the blood from Willie's face, so that for the first time in my life, I saw what people meant when they said white as a sheet. He turned and ran. The Pag frowned to herself and muttered something under her breath. I said, what? And she shook her head, meaning it wasn't important, or if it was important, she wasn't going to tell me. She said, heel to the dogs. Then she took my hand, which was something she hadn't done for years, not since I'd learned to cross the road by myself, and held it tight all the way home. Chapter 4. Willie wasn't at school the next day, which was a relief in one way and not in another. I wanted to know what he was going to do, to find out and get it over and done with. Luckily, Rosie and Tom were well enough to come to school with me. Rosie would never be much use in a fight, but she has a quick, sharp tongue, and sometimes with boys that works better. In the train, I told Tom about Fat Boy, because they were in the same class, and Tom said not to worry. Tom said, he only ever goes after the little kids. I'll just tell him if he bullies you, and I'll just tell him he bullies you and I'll sort it out. He'll be sorry. Although Tom sounded so boastful, he was looking awful after his flu, red around the eyes and still coughing. I said he wasn't to get in a fight for my sake, and he said, suddenly angry, don't nag at me, you're not my mother, and refused to speak to me for the rest of the journey. Willie wasn't there for assembly, nor for the first couple of lessons. I decided that he'd been given permission to miss part of morning school because he had to go to the dentist or something. And when the classroom door opened, my stomach gave a lurch, as if I were going in a lift or an aeroplane. But it wasn't Willie coming in late after a doctor's appointment, after a dentist appointment. It was the school secretary, to say the headmaster would like to see Catriona Brooke in his office. As I followed down the corridor, trying to keep up with the click-clack of her high black heels, I thought of reasons why Hairy Ears had sent for me, starting with the absolute worst, which was that the Pag had fallen off her bike and was all broken up in the hospital, then running through obvious things, like being given £1 million by a shaky old man I'd helped cross the road, who had tracked me to the school by my uniform, and ending with good cheerful reasons, like my odious parents leaving the country forever. This was just fanciful. If my mother and father were doing a moonlight flip, they wouldn't bother to inform Hairy Ears, or even the Pag, come to that. As we reached the headmaster's office, the door opened and a man marched out, looking angry. He was in such a hurry that he collided with the school secretary. Although he apologised to her, he looked as if he would have liked to knock her down and tread on her face. As for me, I was no more than a fly or a cockroach, to be swept aside or murdered with a flit spray, whichever came easier. Flit spray or a flit gun, they used to be called flit guns, is a horrible noxious substance that you use for killing pests. We don't use it anymore, but at the time this book was written, some people would have had them available. He was a tall man with a thin, foxy face. He reminded me of someone, but I didn't have time to think who it might be, because the secretary had tapped on the headmaster's door and was standing aside to usher me in. Hairy Ears has no hair on his head, no hair at all, not even the most delicate wisp, and his face is as round and pink and smooth as a baby's. All his hairy genes are concentrated in his big floppy ears, where the hair grows long and thick and tufty, so that it looks as if he has two stiff brushes growing out of both sides of his face. When we first came to this school, Rosie and I couldn't look at Hairy Ears without laughing, but by now, towards the end of my first term, he'd begun to seem, well, not normally exactly, but certainly less of a freak. Today, for example, I barely noticed his ears. He was smiling at me, but it was a worried sort of smile. And I began to be afraid. Perhaps the pug really has had an accident. Perhaps thinking about it had made it happen. Hairy Ears said, "Sit down, Catriona. I'm sorry to take you out of your class, but I want to talk to you about William Green." Who was William Green? Who was William Green? Hairy Ears said, "He's in your form, Catriona. Perhaps you know him as Willie or Bill. That was who the foxy-faced, angry man had reminded me of." I said, "Willie? That's what we all call him. I didn't know his name was Green." Hairy Ears said, "His father's come to see me, has just been to see me. He's one of our school governors, Sir Archibald Wellington Plunkett Green." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I hoped I looked thoughtful and intelligent. Hairy Ears said, "Sir Archibald has told me that William and two of his friends were on the train with you yesterday, and there was some trouble between you. Of course, he's only heard his son's story. I'd like to hear yours, Catriona." I couldn't think what he meant. I was dumb. Hairy Ears said, "If you'd prefer to discuss this with Mrs. Morgan, I can ask her to speak to you in the lunch hour." Mrs. Morgan was the one me and Rosie called the Light of Science. Rosie and I called the Light of Science. I thought gracefully. At least I know who she is. She was our form mistress as well as our English teacher. I said, I don't know what Willie said, do I? They chased me on the train, Willie's gang. And they teased you. Is that it? Why do you think they picked on you, Catriona? I said, I don't know. They just do that, those boys. Had you been calling them names? He sounded interested, not angry. I said, they weren't just teasing me. Teasing's the wrong word for what they were doing. Teasing doesn't sound serious, but they tried to burn my hair with a cigarette lighter. Hairy Ears said, very gently, as if he didn't want to upset me. What sort of names did you call them? How could I tell him? Snot nose? Fish breath? Hairy Ears said, names can hurt, Catriona, particularly when people are young and not very sure of themselves. I nodded. I was being put in the wrong, but I couldn't see what to do about it. Hairy Ears sighed. He said, apparently Willie is very upset. He's a sensitive boy, so his father says. Can you remember exactly what happened when you got off the train? Willie ran after me, I said, without thinking. So did Fat Boy. I see. Hairy Ears took a pencil out of the jar on his desk and was drawing squiggles on a piece of paper. Then he threw the pencil down and looked at me. We will forget Fat Boy for the moment, except to say that you're quite old enough to know how cruel it is to mock people for physical attributes they may be sensitive about. I thought Hairy Ears should know all about that. I stared at his shiny bald head as he ran his hand over it, a bit nervously, as if he guessed what I was thinking. I said, everyone calls him Fat Boy, it isn't just me. Was it you who called Willie Snot Nose? He asked suddenly, and I couldn't help giggling. It was so funny to hear Hairy Ears say this rude name aloud in such a soft, sunning voice. I looked at my lab. I'd called our French teacher the Tooth Fairy because she had sparkly false teeth that flashed when she laughed. But it was Rosie who made up all the other names, the really unkind names, and I couldn't give Rosie away. Hairy Ears sighed. He said, why did Willie run after you when you got off the train? His father says it was because you forgot your school bag. I muttered, that's what Willie said. He might have just been pretending in front of my grandmother. Ah, Hairy Ears said, yes, your grandmother. He looked into the space behind my head. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. It was a plump sound. Hairy Ears said, your grandmother frightened William, it seems. Threatened him, so Sir Archibald says. I didn't know what to say. It seemed silly to tell him what the pag had said to Willie, saying that you were going to knock someone into the middle of next week, even was a joke, even when it didn't sound like a joke. I said she just told him to stop bullying me. Hairy Ears said, when William got off the train with your bag, he didn't know your grandmother was meeting you, did he? Don't you think it's possible, Catriona, that he might have been sorry that running after you to give you the bag was a kind of apology? If Hairy Ears even believed that, he'd believe anything. And he wanted me to agree with him, to say I was sorry, that Willie Snotnose was really a nice, kind, good boy. That was a kind of bullying too. Not as bad as trying to set fire to someone, but horrible all the same, because I couldn't answer back. I could have told him what the pag sometimes said when people give nice reasons for bad behaviour instead of the true nasty ones. Lay not that flattering sanction to thy soul. But I didn't say this to Hairy Ears, even though it was a quotation from Shakespeare. I said, I don't know, do I? I mean, how could I know? I mean, you'd have to be inside Willie's mind to know for sure, wouldn't you? Hairy Ears looked at me. I could hear the ticking clock again. It must have been ticking all the time we were talking. I thought, it's quite loud. Why couldn't I hear it? Hairy Ears said, Catriona, why are you so angry? That took me by surprise. I burst out, you're saying it's all my fault. I mean, that's not fair. You weren't there. It's just because Willie's father came and complained about me, and he's a school governor. I'm sorry if he was upset, Willie's father, but he shouldn't say things he doesn't know. He wasn't there either. There was a long silence. At least it seemed long to me, and I began to feel a bit frightened. But Hairy Ears was looking at me with a strange, sad expression. He cleared his throat suddenly. He picked up the pencil he'd thrown down on the desk and waggled it between his fingers. He said, watching the pencil, not looking at me, you must feel that William Green is lucky to have a dad to stand up for him. I can empathise with that, Catriona. It's not easy for you with your mother and father always away. And your grandmother, well, of course, I know she's very distinguished, but she's a very old lady to be bringing up a young girl. I explained your circumstances to Sir Archibald, and I think he was disposed to be understanding. I said he didn't look understanding. He looked mad. Don't be pert, Catriona. Hairy Ears was annoyed because I'd interrupted him, but this wasn't the first time I'd put up with grown-ups pitying me for my unnatural home life. The PE teacher had kept me behind one day after netball to ask me if my grandmother had talked to me about starting my periods, as if at the pag's great age she might have forgotten. And after that a dietitian came, doing a survey about what school children ate for breakfast. Our class was asked each in turn, and I said that I had just had some of the dog's rust for breakfast. The dog's rust was stale, homemade wholemeal bread baked in the oven, and I like them with lots of butter and honey, or dripping with soft-boiled egg yolk, much better than fresh bread or toast. But Mrs. Morgan gave me a funny look, and she set us an essay for homework on my favourite food, which had to be about what we actually ate, as well as what we would like to eat. Rosie, who had a delicate stomach, said it was all my fault, giving the light of science the idea that Peg fed me on scraps. Hairy Ears said, William is going into hospital for surgery, for an operation on his sinuses. He's not returning until after Christmas. Perhaps in that time you could try to forget the cruel name you called him and make up your mind to treat him more kindly next term, and if you have any trouble from the other two boys who were involved in this unfortunate incident, you will tell Mrs. Morgan or come straight to me and we will deal with them. Is that understood, Catriona? I was seething inside, but I stood up straight as a poker and kept my face solid and stiff as I said, Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Tom beat up Fat Boy 3 days later. He got knocked about himself too. His form teacher, a skinny old man called Mucklebury, who Rosie hadn't thought of a name for because his own was funny enough, only gave them both a black mark for fighting in the playground and sent them to the washroom to clean himself up. Fish Breath kept his distance. I saw him once or twice, but as soon as he saw me, it melted away. It isn't a gang without Willie, Rosie said. Any luck, they won't get together again when he comes back. Things sort of wear out. Just don't look, Cat. It was you looking started the trouble. Christmas came. The Pag got 2 medical students to house sit and went after the animals, and she and I went to Greece, to the old house in a mountain village that she bought years and years ago and promised to leave to me when she dies. It hasn't got central heating, but the walls are stone and 4 feet thick, and the fire has been lit. And once the fire has been lit, the whole place warms up and stays warm. We didn't have a Christmas tree because the Pag says the Greeks need their trees in the ground, not dug up and then thrown away like useless lumber. She gave me a book of fat Greek myths and a beautiful black velvet miniskirt and a white cashmere sweater. And I gave her a book of poems about cats and a 5-year diary in red leather to make sure she stayed alive until I was at least 17. We went for long walks on the mountain and ate in the taverna and played bezique by the fire. One evening after supper, I thought I might tell her about Hairy Ears and what he'd said about Willie. I started by saying, do you remember that horrible boy you told off that time at the train station? I really wanted to tell her that I kept hearing him saying sneering things in my head, like, dirty old witch. But although I hoped she would laugh and tell me not to be silly, I was afraid she might be hurt underneath. So I wasn't too sorry when she just nodded. Mm. So I wasn't too sorry when she was just nodded absently, looking into the fire, as if she'd half heard me, but was too busy thinking about something else to answer in the moment. Or perhaps she hadn't heard me at all. The wind was booming around the cottage, and she was a bit deaf. Then she said suddenly, "Would you rather have stayed at home, Kat? At your age at Christmas, you should be with your friends, having fun, going to parties, not stuck halfway up a freezing Greek mountain with an old bag like me." I said, "You're a pack, not a bag, not a nag." But she didn't laugh. She was serious. I said, "I'm not sure I'm exactly ready for acid house raves. And I don't have all that many friends except Rosie and Tom. I mean, friends I want to be with." She sighed. She lit one of her smelly cigarettes and wrinkled her eyes against the smoke. She still wasn't looking at me. I said, "Most people I know would give a lot to have a house in Greece to go to, with the sea and the sun and the swimming." She said in her hoarse, smoky voice, "I suppose it's all right in the summer." I said, "What's wrong with you? Something you ate?" She didn't smile. She didn't answer. I said, "I love being here, just you and me. Don't you know that?" That wasn't quite true. I liked being with the Pag, just the two of us, but the only advantage of Greece in the winter was that none of her mad old patients could get hold of her, either telephone or turn up, which they were liable to do at holiday times when they felt especially lonely. Last year at Christmas, old Flossie had arrived on the doorstep at lunchtime, dressed in what might have been, a very long time ago, someone else's cast-off party clothes. She was wearing a pink satin blouse and a short, tight satin skirt that showed her soft, bulgy white knees, black socks that wrinkled round her ankles. She hadn't washed before she put on this festive attire, and the whiff from her armpits rather spoiled the lovely smell of the goose. But when she left, she said, "Thank you for having me," quite politely, and actually smiled, which astonished me. After she'd gone, I said to the Pag, "Must be the first time anyone's seen the inside of Flossie's mouth for years. I don't suppose she goes to the dentist right often." The Pag has quite a taste for silly jokes, usually. It's one of the ungrown up things about her that make her fun to be with. She did smile, but quickly turning away, and not before I'd seen tears in her eyes. And although I knew that Flossie dressed up for a party was a pitiful sight as well as a funny one, it was the first time I'd seen the Pag cry, and this made me feel shaky. It It struck me now that she might have decided to come to Greece for Christmas just to avoid old Flossie, or Mr. Wilberforce Frisbee, or other unwelcome but impossible to turn away, any other unwelcome but impossible to turn away visitor turning up for Christmas dinner. She didn't mind for herself, but she thought how funny old people were boring for me. I said, I didn't mean it wasn't nice when Flossie came last year. I mean, I enjoyed that too, making her happy. The pag looked at me then. Her expression was sad. She said, you should have gone to your mother and father this Christmas. She always said, your mother. I realised suddenly. Never my daughter. I laughed. I said, no way. No way, not ever. You know that, don't you? For one thing, there's no room in that horrible flat. The last time I went, I had to sleep on the floor in a sort of cupboard without any windows. And they don't want me there anyway. Whether they do or don't, the fact is they asked you. The pag sat up, very straight-backed and brisk suddenly. To be exact, your mother told me to tell you. They've bought a house. Settling down at last is what your mother said. So of course they want you to live with them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, nor could I tell what the pag was thinking. Her eyes were unblinking, still as blue ice. I said, I won't go. You know that, don't you? You can't make me. I'd run away. Then I thought, that's what the pag's done, of course. She hadn't told me we were going to Greece until the day before Christmas Eve. I thought she'd kept it till then as a surprise. Instead, she'd booked our flight at the very last minute so that we could escape from my mother, her daughter. I got up and ran at her, stumbling. She opened my arms and held me tight on her bony lap. I said into her shoulder, we've run away, haven't we? I wondered why you'd make up your mind all of a sudden. She rocked me backwards and forwards. I was so relieved. I was snuffling, half laughing, half crying. I said, I knew you'd never send me away. She made a funny noise deep in her throat. She pushed me away from her, and I slid off her lap and knelt at her feet. Then she put her long, twiggy hands either side of my face and stroked my chin with her thumbs. Her fingers were rough, but I knew she meant to be loving, so I kept still. She told me, I told your mother she would have to be patient. I told her she must give us both time to get used to it. So we're going to leave it there for today. But it sounds like Kat's got a little bit of upheaval going on. She's got Willie and his dad being very unkind. She's got in trouble with school. And now she's got her famous mum and dad deciding all of a sudden that she should go and live with them. So that seems a lot for one person to manage. But we'll have to see how she does in the next few chapters. I apologise as well if any of the bullying scenes were upsetting to anybody. If you feel the need to skip any of that, please do. I would never want to give anybody any, worry or any anxiety about things like that. Anyway, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, subscribing, commenting. It really makes my day when you do. And Henry and I, let's get you up, mister. We'll see you soon for another story. Bye-bye, everybody. Can you wave, Henry? Good boy. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Cheerio.